Before we start, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. Maybe you're someone who's never prayed before, but you're facing something that feels impossible to handle alone. Maybe you're questioning whether God actually listens, whether prayer actually works, or whether there's any point in asking for help from something you can't see or prove exists. Maybe you're in the darkest moment of your life and you're wondering if anyone, anywhere cares about what you're going through. This conversation is for you. I want to tell you about a prayer I said in 2008 that literally saved my life. Not metaphorically, not spiritually, though it did both of those things too, but literally. A prayer that pulled me back from the edge of a decision that would have ended everything I've built, everything I am, and everything I was meant to become. This isn't a story about finding religion or becoming some kind of saint. I'm still the same person who works 80-hour weeks, who gets frustrated with inefficiency, who sometimes says things I shouldn't say on social media. But I'm also someone who learned that there are moments when your own strength isn't enough, when your own intelligence can't solve the problem, when your own will can't carry you through. I learned that sometimes the most rational thing you can do is admit you need help from something bigger than yourself. December 2008. Tesla was 3 months away from bankruptcy. SpaceX had just suffered our third consecutive rocket failure. I had invested everything, my entire PayPal fortune, my reputation, my sanity, into two companies that the world was convinced would never work. The media was calling me a fraud, investors were backing out, employees were losing faith. The woman I loved was questioning whether she could build a life with someone whose dreams kept turning into disasters. But none of that was the worst part. The worst part was that I was starting to believe they were right. For the first time in my life, I genuinely believed I had failed at something that mattered. Not just failed at a business venture, I had failed at my mission to help humanity. I had wasted resources that could have gone to actual solutions. I had deluded myself into thinking I could solve problems that smarter people than me had already determined were unsolvable. I was sitting in my office at SpaceX at 3 a.m., staring at financial projections that showed we'd be out of money in 60 days. Tesla needed another $40 million that no one was willing to give us. SpaceX needed to prove that our rocket design could work, but we couldn't afford another test launch. For the first time in my adult life, I couldn't see a path forward. Every option led to failure. Every scenario ended with both companies closing, thousands of people losing their jobs, and me becoming a cautionary tale about the dangers of unrealistic ambition. I had been working for 72 hours straight, surviving on coffee and stubbornness, when something inside me finally broke. Not my determination, my pride. The pride that had convinced me I could figure this out on my own, that I could engineer my way out of any problem, that intelligence and effort were always enough. Sitting there in that empty office, surrounded by the dreams I was about to watch die, I did something I hadn't done since I was a child. I prayed. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't raised in a particularly religious household. My mother had faith, but she wasn't evangelical about it. I had always been more comfortable with science than spirituality, more trusting of what I could measure than what I had to believe. But in that moment, with nowhere else to turn, I found myself talking to God like he was sitting across from me at my desk. I didn't ask for success. I didn't ask for money. I didn't ask for the problems to go away. I asked for clarity. God, I said out loud to the empty room, I don't know if I'm supposed to keep fighting or if I'm supposed to let this go. I don't know if I'm being stubborn or if I'm being faithful. I don't know if these companies are meant to succeed or if I'm just too proud to admit they're meant to fail. I've been trying to do this on my own, and I can't. I need to know, am I supposed to keep going or am I supposed to stop? Give me a sign, give me wisdom, give me whatever I need to make the right decision, even if it's the decision to quit. That was it. No eloquent theology, no bargaining, no promises about what I'd do if he helped me, just an honest admission that I was lost and needed guidance. I put my head down on my desk and, for the first time in months, I fell asleep. I woke up 4 hours later to my phone ringing. It was 7 a.m., and the caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Elon, this is Valor Equity Partners. We've been watching what you're doing with Tesla, and we'd like to talk about an investment. In the next 6 hours, I received 3 more calls. Investors who had been silent for months were suddenly interested. A potential customer wanted to discuss a large order. A supplier called to offer extended payment terms. Was this God answering my prayer? Was it coincidence? Was it just the universe's timing finally aligning with my efforts? I don't know, and honestly, it doesn't matter. What matters is that in the moment when I finally admitted I couldn't do it alone, help arrived. In the moment when I stopped trying to control everything and asked for guidance, the path forward became clear. But here's the most important part. The help didn't come in the form of magic solutions. It came in the form of opportunities that still required enormous work, difficult decisions, and significant risk. God didn't solve my problems for me. He gave me the strength and clarity to solve them myself. Over the next 3 months, we raised enough funding to keep Tesla alive. SpaceX's 4th launch succeeded, proving that our design could work. Both companies survived, and eventually, both began to thrive. But the real miracle wasn't the business success. The real miracle was what happened to me in that moment of surrender. Before that night, I thought prayer was either begging or bargaining. You ask God for things you want, and either He gives them to you or He doesn't. And that determines whether prayer works. But that's not what prayer actually does. Prayer doesn't change God's mind about what should happen. Prayer changes your mind about what you can handle. When I prayed that night, I wasn't asking God to make Tesla and SpaceX successful. I was asking Him to help me understand what I was supposed to do next. I was admitting that my perspective was limited, that my understanding was incomplete, that I needed wisdom from a source beyond my own experience. And that admission, that surrender, changed everything. It changed how I approached problems. Instead of believing I had to have all the answers, I became willing to seek help, advice, and perspective from others. Instead of seeing every setback as a personal failure, I started seeing them as information about what to try next. It changed how I dealt with stress. Instead of carrying the weight of everything on my shoulders, I started recognizing that some outcomes were beyond my control, and my job was to do my best with what I could control and trust the process for the rest. It changed how I made decisions. Instead of relying only on data and logic, I started paying attention to intuition, to the sense of rightness or wrongness that comes from somewhere deeper than analysis. Most importantly, it changed my relationship with failure. Before that prayer, failure felt like evidence that I wasn't smart enough, wasn't working hard enough, wasn't worthy of success. After that prayer, failure felt like redirection, information about what wasn't meant to be, guidance toward what was. I know some of you are thinking, this is just psychology. You relaxed, you got better sleep, your stress levels decreased, and that allowed you to think more clearly and recognize opportunities you might have missed. You're probably right. And so what? Whether prayer works through divine intervention or through the psychological benefits of surrender doesn't change the fact that it works. Whether God directly arranged those phone calls or whether my change in attitude made me more receptive to possibilities that were already there doesn't change the outcome. The question isn't whether prayer is scientifically explainable. The question is whether it's practically effective. And in my experience, it is. Prayer forces you to admit that you don't have all the answers. It requires humility, which is one of the most useful attitudes you can have when facing complex problems. It creates space for solutions you hadn't considered, perspectives you hadn't imagined, help you hadn't thought to seek. Prayer also creates what I can only describe as peace in the middle of chaos. Not the peace of knowing everything will work out the way you want, but the peace of knowing that your worth isn't determined by whether everything works out the way you want. When you truly surrender the outcome to something bigger than yourself, you become free to do your best work without being paralyzed by the fear of failure. That night in 2008 changed how I approach prayer. I don't pray for specific outcomes anymore. I don't ask God to make Tesla stock go up, or to make our rocket launches succeed, or to give me good health. Instead, I pray for wisdom to make good decisions, I pray for strength to handle whatever outcomes those decisions create. I pray for humility to recognize when I'm wrong and courage to change course when necessary. I pray for the people I love, not that God will give them everything they want, but that He'll give them everything they need to become who they're meant to be. I pray for my enemies, yes, really, not because I'm some kind of saint, but because carrying anger toward people who've hurt me is exhausting, and forgiveness is the most practical gift I can give myself. I pray for guidance about how to use whatever resources and influence I have in ways that actually help humanity. I don't assume that just because I can do something, I should do it. I ask for wisdom about which problems are mine to solve and which ones I should leave to others who are better equipped. And I pray with gratitude, not just for the obvious blessings, but for the difficult experiences that have taught me things I couldn't have learned any other way, for the failures that redirected me toward better paths, for the people who've challenged me to grow beyond what was comfortable. I need to be honest about something. Prayer doesn't always result in the outcomes you're hoping for. I've prayed for things that didn't happen. I've asked for guidance that didn't come in the form I expected. I've surrendered problems to God that still ended in what felt like failure. When my relationship with my father became even more strained in recent years, I prayed for healing, for reconciliation between us, for wisdom about how to repair a relationship that had been complicated and difficult my entire life. Those prayers weren't answered in the way I wanted. But even then, prayer helped. It helped me process the pain, find acceptance, and focus on what I could control, how I chose to respond to him, how I chose to forgive past hurts, how I chose to learn from our difficult relationship, instead of just being bitter about it. Prayer doesn't guarantee that you'll get what you want, but it does help you handle whatever you get with more grace, more perspective, and more peace. Sometimes the answer to your prayer is not yet. Sometimes it's something better is coming. Sometimes it's this isn't yours to fix. And sometimes it's you're strong enough to handle this, even though you don't feel like you are. All of those answers have value, even when they're not the answers you were hoping for. Every morning, before I check my phone, before I look at the news, before I dive into the day's problems, I say a simple prayer. It takes about 30 seconds, and it sets the tone for everything that follows. God, help me see clearly today. Help me make decisions that serve something bigger than my own ego. Give me the wisdom to know the difference between what I can control and what I need to surrender. Help me be present for the people who need me and honest about what I need from others. And whatever happens today, help me handle it with grace. That's it. No request for specific outcomes, no bargaining, no complicated theology. Just a simple acknowledgement that I'm not in this alone, that my perspective is limited, and that I need help being the person I want to be. This prayer has guided me through rocket explosions and successful launches, through personal losses and professional victories, through days when everything went right and days when everything went wrong. It's not magic. It doesn't make problems disappear or guarantee success. But it does something more valuable. It reminds me that my job is to do my best and trust the process for the rest. Maybe you're listening to this and thinking, I don't believe in God. This isn't relevant to me. I understand that. I was skeptical too. But here's what I've learned. You don't have to have perfect faith to benefit from prayer. You don't have to understand exactly how it works or have all your theological questions answered. You just have to be willing to admit that you don't have all the answers and that you could use some help figuring things out. Call it God, call it the universe, call it your higher self, call it whatever feels authentic to you. The label matters less than the practice of surrender, the admission of humility, and the openness to guidance from sources beyond your own limited perspective. Even if you think you're just talking to yourself, there's value in that conversation. There's value in articulating your fears, your hopes, your confusion, and your gratitude. There's value in taking a step back from the constant noise of daily life and asking yourself what really matters. Prayer, at its core, is just honest conversation about what you're really experiencing and what you really need. Whether that conversation is with God or with yourself, whether it's answered by divine intervention or by psychological insight, the practice itself is valuable. Prayer is the best investment I've ever made. It costs nothing, requires no special equipment or training, and the returns compound over time. Every moment of clarity I've gained through prayer has led to better decisions. Every bit of peace I've found through surrender has made me more effective under pressure. Every lesson I've learned about humility has made me a better leader, a better father, and a better human being. The problems I thought would destroy me in 2008 became the foundation for everything I've built since then. Tesla went from near bankruptcy to becoming the most valuable car company in the world. SpaceX went from 3 failures to regularly launching astronauts to space. But more importantly, I went from someone who thought he had to control everything to someone who understands the power of doing his best and trusting the process for the rest. That transformation didn't happen because of the business success. The business success happened because of that transformation. If you're facing something that feels impossible right now, if you're at the end of your own strength and you don't know what to do next, try praying. Even if you're not sure anyone is listening, even if you feel awkward or uncertain about how to do it, you don't need special words or perfect theology. You just need honesty about what you're experiencing and openness to help from whatever source it might come. Start simple. I don't know what to do. Help me see clearly. Help me understand what I'm supposed to do next. Then listen, not for a voice from heaven, but for that quiet sense of knowing that comes when you stop trying to force solutions and start being open to guidance. Pay attention to opportunities that arise, conversations that happen, ideas that occur to you in moments of quiet. Notice what brings you peace and what creates anxiety. Trust the wisdom that emerges when you stop trying so hard to figure everything out with your mind alone. The prayer that saved my life wasn't answered immediately or obviously, but it was answered completely, just not in the way I expected. Maybe the same thing is waiting for you. Maybe the help you need is closer than you think. Maybe the breakthrough you're hoping for is on the other side of admitting you can't create it by yourself. Maybe it's time to pray. Share this with someone who might need to hear that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Subscribe if these conversations help you think differently about faith, business, and what it means to surrender control without giving up responsibility. And remember, you don't have to understand how prayer works to benefit from praying. You just have to be willing to try. What would happen if you admitted you need help and asked for it?